It's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, back with another not quite weekly update.
Yeah, we've travelled a bit since we did this last.
Yeah.
So we missed last time because we were actually in transit when this event dropped, the previous event dropped.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got an interesting outlook to discuss, the highlights from.
Yes, we're just poised to mail it to subscribers.
Just about.
Another positive GDT event and, of course, chat of the week.
All right, let's kick into it. So, as you said, we're about to drop our April 23 directions. Things haven't changed a great deal. I guess, we still see the general proposition or the general position we've got in this is that, there's a slow recovery in values coming, but probably a bit of turbulence in the way.
Sure.
Milk output is slowing in the EU and US, but that's patchy. And that's also got some risks attached to it. So in the short term, we could still see, we haven't gone through the peak of production in each region yet. So that will bring its own challenges. Southeast Asian demand should recover. So should Chinese consumer demand, and that will eventually flow into improved imports. But we've got some headwinds in demand in Europe and potentially in the US, where demand is steady, but not all that strong. So that whole, big picture view here, which is quite interesting, I think, Vuko pulled this out. Milk production is just increasing slightly in a rolling 12-month, but trade is well down. So the thing that's letting down the whole complex is essentially European demand at the moment, domestic demand. So that's weakening, and providing more commodity supply, I guess. If we go forward, what can go wrong?
In this outlook, this slow recovery outlook.
And there's more reds than greens here, Joe, which it doesn't mean we're bearish. I think we should just be aware of the risks. A lot of people want to talk this up right now and looking to say, well, demand will surge back and we'll be right. And EU milk could slow quickly with milk prices tumbling, and there's some pretty horrible river heights and drought areas being impacted in Europe. That could get a lot worse more quickly and impact feed and certainly cow numbers. But on the other hand, their cheese demand could get worse. Now, recession's looming,
Yeah, not just in Europe, but in most developed economies. And that would mean a bit more export availability out of Europe. That obviously will ripple through other markets. Yeah,
so this is what's been going on. And I suppose the risk is this continues if European cheese prices don't recover quickly. Here we see, EU mozzarella, and this is a chart we should acknowledge. The chart we've got in our system, but was put up in the Outlook session in the ADPI event by Phil Plord. Started his session with this.
Yes.
So this is the biggest short-term issue in the US market right now. So that mozzarella price pressure is pulling down, directly impacting the US market, pushing product. It's pushing milk into cheddar rather than mozzarella to avoid that low European price. So that's pushing short-term cheese back onto the market and keeping the US cheese market weaker and the whole complex weaker.
Yes.
So quite an interesting effect, which could be prolonged if that demand gets worse.
That's right. And then China, obviously, another key aspect of this, if their milk supply remains high, that's going to be an issue in terms of their import demand, and that flows through to what New Zealand might do in the coming season.
That's right. We'll talk a bit more about that as we go. Southeast Asian inflation is still rising in some countries. Food price inflation is still moving up. So that it certainly looks like it's hampered demand. But that last point there, we're shifting across to an El Nino in our region. Not that we'd know that today. We've just had a hailstorm here.
Yes, it's a very wet autumn here, but the odds are that El Nino impacts will really be felt later in the year. It's a little bit less certain in terms of impact in New Zealand than it is here in southeastern Australia. It's associated with drier conditions, but it's just more uncertainty in terms of weather, which we always have at this time with New Zealand.
Yeah, and I suppose the point is last season there was quite a bad spring, so if it is a little bit drier, there's a chance it just gets back to some sort of normal conditions. Sure. It would be better year on year. All right. Well, then the run up to this GDT, we had kind of mixed signals as we came into it. Skim milk powder generally more positive. We're not sure why. Europe didn't really move up. In fact, if we ran that to the following week and that bottom skim milk powder futures comparison, it would have shown that it's fallen back a bit, but it's improved a little. Butter was weaker in Europe. New Zealand butter didn't do anything, so I didn't bother putting that chart up. But as we discussed, that US cheese market's a little weaker in the short term, because of that pressure on export opportunities and pushing back into the market. So quite mixed in the run-up.
Yeah.
But this event was positive.
Yeah. Which, I don't know, I was a little bit surprised. Were you, Steve?
Yeah, but look, it's come from the sources you'd want to. So last event, which we missed in this video series, we had strange demand from, not strange, but just unusual demand from the Middle East, which helped.
It was a real anomaly, wasn't it?
Yeah, which helped skim milk powder. But here we've had better demand from the most important markets. Bit mixed in fats, as you can see, but that's pushed. GDT butter is higher than Europe again. Cheddar much stronger. Skim milk powder much stronger.
Yeah.
So
we should just probably say that volumes on offer this time were a fair bit lower.
The lowest since last June. So we're at the seasonal trough.
That's right.
So the absolute tonnages of what's being purchased are lower than what we'd expect. So they take too much away from it. It's not a surge, but it is, year on year positive. Whole milk powder was on the up.
Yes.
So we saw a small lift last time that was driven by other buying regions. It wasn't particularly strong, but we've had pulse and now this one. So that's quite an upswing. Will it continue? In terms of skim milk powder, we've got this big differential which remains large, not quite as big as what we saw last event, but the differential between Fonterra and Arla product is pretty strong still. This time, however, Arla's product improved nearly $200 a tonne on average, whereas the Fonterra price stayed pretty flat, as you can see in the chart. So quite a mixed event from that point of view. In terms of demand, we haven't talked much about fats. Fats demand was pretty similar, even though AMF started out stronger, it certainly faded, and we ended up with a much weaker result. But you can see the two powders much stronger than average.
Yes.
So that led to good results, and this is how they looked round to round. You love this stuff, I know.
Riveting.
Whole milk powder stayed higher longer and therefore delivered a more positive result.
Yeah.
So Chinese buying, we've only shown two regions here, but Chinese buying was stronger percentage terms than the previous event. They were actually stronger across all categories.
Yes.
As it turned out this time around, which is encouraging. Southeast Asian buying was also up in each case. Milk powder just up a touch, but skim was a bit stronger, and their butter purchases were also higher again. Now that could be Australia. It could be an Oceania purchase there because we know how short butter supplies are here.
We certainly do.
But that was a stronger purchase there. And Middle East couldn't sustain that demand last time for skim milk powder, and that just, if anything, presents a really interesting looking chart.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the usual comparatives that we do, that whole milk powder, synthetic value comparison still very tight.
It is now, yeah. Right
back together and might stay there for a while. But the AMF discount got bigger again.
It did.
With a hefty fall. So that's due to go up anytime soon, but it may bounce around for a while. let's just see. Joe, chart of the week.
Chart of the week, well, just I guess closing the loop on what we were talking about earlier in terms of New Zealand product mix and also exports. This is New Zealand whole milk powder exports. That's up to March, so another month on what we were able to put out with our Global Dairy Directions trade analysis. And it's still a pretty grim picture, isn't it, Steve? Certainly well down year on year. Slightly better in March than the month before, but really very low in comparison to the prior year. Are we due for a rebound?
Well, if you look at the big picture around this, Chinese milk supplies is said to be, in local data, rising about 11% at the moment. And in the first quarter, the largest milk processor published its sales results in Q1, suggesting its UHT milk, which is most of its business, went up only 5% year on year. So they increased production of whole milk powder significantly. Doesn't quite add up when you look at all their numbers, but nonetheless, they've increased their output locally. So that's still adding to stocks, right? So it's a while before they work through that. It's not a big stockpile relative to these numbers, look at annually, but it's still got to be worked through, and there'll be some shandying as we go. Yes. So we've got a while to work through this.
Absolutely.
Will it change? Well, you can always take a hint around this time of year as to what's being projected as the offer on GDT in the next 12 months. And so this is from last week's release of numbers, the end of April. Keep looking at this through the end of May, which is the end of the season, showing there's no change expected.
No, in what's going to be offered on the platform. So, that's interesting.
Which is only a portion of this total export business. But
could be a little indicator there that there's not an expectation that the product mix will change much from this current season.
Which has ramifications for the skim milk powder market, of course, as that supply stays heavier. Righto, interesting. Thanks for watching. It's great to be back, and we'll be back again sometime soon. Thanks for watching.